The last few weeks have felt like a real breath of fresh air. We've seen a new president of the United States sworn in, one who has already committed to transitioning the entire federal fleet to electric, has made a commitment to rejoin the Paris Climate Accord, and has laid out a robust energy policy that not only takes a hard line on dumping fossil fuels and committing to a sustainable energy future, but has treated that transition as one that is a matter of national security and national public health. And we've seen major good news stories from within the EV industry as well. Tesla's had its best quarter yet. Arcimoto has proved that you can break the rules and still be an EV pioneer. And Rivian has proved that there are insane levels of funding out there for the taking. And today we got the latest in that round of good news vibes, one that stands to make waves not only in the EV industry but also globally in the automotive marketplace. The news? That General Motors, the car company that has for way too many years danced around the periphery of electric vehicles, has officially stated its desire to go full carbon neutral by 2040 and to make its entire light-duty fleet zero emissions by 2035. This wasn't a video I was expecting to make, but the news I think is so important for the automotive industry that I decided to stop what I was planning on releasing and focusing on this instead. And today, in the limited time I've had to prepare this breaking news story, I'm going to ask exactly what GM's commitment means, what's next, and most importantly, ask if it's going to be enough. Let's deal with those actual statements made by the company. Issued through a press release earlier this morning, General Motors, which I should remind you is the US's largest automaker by volume, has stated that it, quotes, plan to become carbon neutral in its global productions and operations by 2040 and has committed to setting science-based targets to achieve carbon neutrality, end quote. It's also signed the Business Ambition Pledge for 1.5 degrees Celsius, a worldwide effort with 1,182 signatories to transition to zero carbon in order to limit the global temperature rise caused by anthropogenic climate change to 1.5 degrees Celsius. It went on to state that it is working and has worked with the Environmental Defence Fund to set forward a plan that will enable it to establish a, quote, all-electric future and an aspiration to eliminate tailpipe emissions from new light-duty vehicles by 2035, end quote. As a brand, General Motors, which includes Cadillac, Chevrolet, GMC, Hummer, Buick and others, says it will offer 30 all-electric models around the world by the middle of this decade, by which point it says 40% of all of its US vehicles will be battery electric. In addition, GM has laid out a plan to power its facilities around the world by 100% renewable energy by 2035, with that goal being reached in the United States 5 years earlier. Finally, it plans to make use of limited carbon offsetting and credits to, quote, account for the expected remaining carbon emissions. Those are the pledges, but how do they translate to real-world, tangible actions? Well, some news outlets, primarily ones that focus on Tesla, have already begun to lay into GM as being too vague or too slow to make the transition to electric and being too vague in its pledge. But I think it's important to remember one vital fact here, that if you combine all of the vehicles General Motors makes and sells in the United States, it is the largest car company. A commitment to transition its entire light-duty vehicle fleet to electric in the next 14 years may seem like too little too late, but if you consider the sheer volume of vehicles and the fact that light-duty basically includes every type of passenger car on sale, plus most of the pickup trucks purchased for personal or small business use, this is a big deal. Other automakers have made similar pledges and are making progress on it, but as the US's largest automaker, GM, if it can follow through on its promise, could make a major impact on emissions. Especially if you consider, as its CEO Mary Barrett admitted in a recent LinkedIn post, 75% of all emissions tied to General Motors come from the tailpipes of the vehicles it makes. But on the flip side, 14 years is still a long time. Too long when we've got a 3-bell alarm of climate change in effect. Sure, we are going to see the Chevrolet Bolt EV get a refresh this year, the Chevrolet Bolt EUV launch, and the Hummer EV, Cadillac Lyriq, and a few other models get their debuts. And Ultium battery technology, as I've noted before, seems to have the potential to lay the groundwork to a future where car battery packs can not only be easily switched out when something goes wrong with them, but can also be upgraded to the latest and greatest tech when required. No fuss. GM has been promising new electric models for some time, and we are now starting to see those slowly enter into production. And that's great news. But what also sits in the back of my mind is the number of large gas-guzzling SUVs and pickup trucks, vehicles which are cash cows for GM and every other legacy automaker, that are gaining in popularity. Last year, carbon emissions from transportation fell, partly because of COVID-19 and partly because of an increase in electric vehicle sales. But thanks to a similar increase in sales of SUVs, they were pretty much cancelling out the effect of increased EV sales. In other words, it doesn't really matter how many EVs you sell. If you are selling more gas guzzlers that are anything but environmentally friendly, you are still going to struggle when it comes to emissions. As a side note here, in case you're not aware, US corporate average fuel economy standards, as with other standards that are similar in other parts of the world, are a little bit weird. They take into effect all of the vehicles sold by an automaker and average their fleet-wide emissions. Selling more electric vehicles allows a company to also sell more gas guzzlers. And last year, GM unveiled new versions of its largest SUV ever, the 12th generation Chevrolet Suburban. If it sticks to standard production cycles, we can expect that behemoth to sell all the way through until 2028, in its current form. But wait. While it's easy to wail on GM for continuing to produce gas guzzlers, and we should, the transition to electric is something that we can also be grateful for. Car companies don't have the ability right now to transition overnight, and I'd prefer that transition to take place over 5 years, or maybe 10 rather than 15. But I think the transition is going to happen faster anyway, and I'm about to tell you why. The US federal government, a corporate client that uses General Motors vehicles, has just made a massive commitment to go fully electric, using US-made vehicles. That means a heavy push on US automakers to develop and not only make family cars and runabouts, but also full-size SUVs and pickup trucks too. And Ultium, General Motors' new battery technology, has been built with that scalability in mind. Its Hummer EV, which makes use of the Ultium technology, may be an exercise in sheer power and excessiveness at the sacrifice of energy efficiency, but it would also be an ideal base for which to base a more work-oriented pickup truck, military vehicle, and maybe even a new zero-emission version of the presidential beast. After all, previous versions of the Beast limousine were based on GM's full-size SUV chassis, so why not make a full-size model based on the largest, chunkiest Ultium chassis, complete with all-wheel drive and insane performance? The Beast isn't a vehicle that needs to cover huge distances, although being able to accelerate out of trouble is a must, so you don't really need to worry about range anxiety. What does this all mean? Well, if the US federal government under President Biden is actually serious about transitioning its fleet to electric, and President Biden is serious about accelerating the electric vehicle revolution, I think General Motors and others could be persuaded to accelerate their push to zero tailpipe emissions, either through the need to satisfy massively expensive government contracts, or through the drive of incentives and disincentives on the market. Will it do it on its own? No. GM has already demonstrated an uncomfortable tendency to switch policies depending on whom is in power at the time. For example, it previously opposed California's attempts to keep its zero-emission mandates and sided with the Trump administration on a single, lower-state, nationwide fuel economy target, only to switch it when the results of the election were known. In its most recent policy announcements and renewed pushes towards EVs, it suggests a line with the company that acknowledges the writing is on the wall, so to speak, for internal combustion engines. Which brings me to my final point. While we can argue the point over if GM is doing this sincerely or just trying to keep everyone happy, I'm going to respectfully suggest that it's a moot point. What we are finally seeing is more electric vehicles and a commitment to electric vehicles looking forward. I have every expectation that larger vehicles will feature hydrogen-powered fuel cell stacks, something that GM has hinted aplenty, and actually I'm okay with that too, in preference to internal combustion. But what I hope, however, is that we and the rest of the industry work to educate and inform the general public, because right now, without a better cultural awareness and understanding of electric vehicles, and believe me, the majority of the world's population outside of the EV bubble are still very much in the dark about EVs. None of this will matter. Consumers will go with what they know, which may not always be the best choice in the long term. We all have a lot of work to do as advocates and owners. We should celebrate and encourage any automaker making the switch, accelerate their demand, and champion the change. After all, General Motors is a business, and like any automaker and any business, it will make business decisions based on its profit and market resilience. The fact GM is doing this now suggests that it's realised it can no longer hide from the fact that oil and internal combustion engines are dying, and we should most certainly celebrate that. And that's it for today. As always, thanks to the folks on my right for being our $15 to $49 a month Patreon supporters. Special thanks to our $50 a month Patreons. That's John Lyons, Regine Fellows, Jeffrey Songster, Anonymous Freak, Paul Conway, Laura Sanborn, Anthony Coates, and Tesla in the Gong. And our deepest gratitude to our $100 a month Patreon supporters. That's Marcel Ward, Reggie Watts, JP Fagerback, Sean Ueda, Will Graylin, and Ian. If you'd like to become a wonderful Patreon supporter yourself, you'll follow one of the links below to do so, or you can follow the links to become a donator through Ko-fi or Bitcoin. You'll also find a link to our free Discord server, so sign up and come and join in the chat and the fun. And don't forget to check out our merch over at Redbubble. After you've seen the names of the Patreon supporters finish scrolling, there will be a new suggestion for a video to watch, so give it a go if you haven't, and I will be back very soon. Thanks for joining me, and as always, keep evolving!